We're running a bit short on time, so we will ask the questions later, but thank you very much, team. I just want to make a point which is relevant to what Brian said. We did a calculation based on the success of the demonstrator and the viability of that COTS technology, and we looked at the typical hybrid controller system that is on the market. The shipyard that delivers this boat is charged 10,800 euros for the control system, and it doesn't work. They have to recall the boats from the market because it's based on an old air condition controller to actually control an electric motor and a diesel engine. We have calculated that based on real promise and the technology you have just seen, we can deliver a fault-tolerant system based on either an Android device front end, an iPad, or a Windows 7 phone for 980 euros into the shipyard. That's 10% of what they're paying today, and it will work. We know it. Okay. Yes, it does. It does. Actually. You know, it's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal what you can get out of these plug computers in terms of quality and bang for the buck. It's virtually for free, basically. Okay. Jim Jagielski, wholeheartedly welcome. We are honored to have you and your colleague, keynote speakers here. Jim, probably to the open source community, doesn't need any introduction whatsoever, and I will make it short. He is currently president and director of Apache Foundation, Software Foundation. You actually co-founded it. You've been around there all the time. You're also on the open source initiative, and you're a keen developer at RedHat. So we're honored to have you here, and please let us know what you have to share.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me here. Real quick, I'm going to go through a quick introduction with the agenda. I have the coveted position of standing between you and lunch, so I'll try to keep this as quickly as possible. First of all, I'll go over a little bit about myself, although Gear did a fantastic job. We'll talk about the ASF, the Apache Software Foundation, some of the lessons learned of the ASF. Why was I invited to come here, basically, and enjoy the beautiful hospitality of everyone from Malta. As Gear said, I am most probably the longest time contributor at the ASF, which I did help co-found, member president of the foundation itself. I'm also serving on the board of a couple of other open source initiatives out there, the Open Source Initiative OSI, Outer Curve, other ones as well. And to pay the bills, I work for RedHat. Okay, the ASF is the Apache Software Foundation. Now, before there was this legal entity called the ASF, there was this informal group of developers called the Apache Group. And it was in 1999 that we actually decided to legally create a corporation, a nonprofit foundation called the Apache Software Foundation. And the reason why is because IBM, a company you may have heard of, was really seriously looking at the internet. They wanted to be able to sell a web server. And the one they wanted to sell was the Apache web server. Unfortunately, who could they license it from? There was really no legal entity for them to be able to do that. So you see that there is, from the very beginning, this tight collaboration between industry and open source. For open source to succeed, there always needs to be that synergy between the two. As I mentioned, we are a 501c3. That's a very special tax bracket in the U.S. IRS system. And it basically means it's a nonprofit for public charity, okay? It's 100% volunteer driven. No one gets paid by the ASF to do anything for the ASF. We do not pay developers. I do not get a salary from the Apache Software Foundation for any of the stuff I do. Everything is done by volunteers. The reason why, and it gets back to Brian's point about passion. We are passionate about what we do. And what you'll see is that being able to leverage that passion is crucial for the success of open source technologies. Zach himself talked about how he's a passionate sailor, and that's what really drew him to MARSEC. So this is very, very important to remember that. won't go into a lot of stuff about the ASF. As I said before, it is 100% member-driven. Members nominate and elect new members. We elect a board. If you have like social clubs in Malta, that's what the ASF is. The ASF exists so developers can do the fun stuff, which is develop code. Okay, we have what's called an organization chart. Okay, on the right-hand side, there's the administrative overhead you need because it's a nonprofit organization. So you have members who are the members of the nonprofit, officers, and the board members. But the most important part, the most important aspect of what the ASF is, there you go, are the people on the left-hand side, the actual developers. Okay, these are the people who do the actual development of all the open source projects that we're working about. Now, of course, there's a lot of overlap because people who are members of the ASF, the foundation, are also PMC members, committers, and stuff like that. But the important thing to take away from this slide is there is that solid line between the administrative side of the ASF and the development side of the ASF. The administrative side does not tell the projects what to do. The board does not go up to the Hadoop project, for example. Hadoop is a very famous open source project with the ASF and say, you need to add this feature. There is no line of communication from that way. All the development, all the energy is done from the developer side, not from the administrative side. Again, the administrative side exists simply to maintain the legal structure of the ASF so we can continue to do the fun stuff, which is develop code. So our main mantra, the thing that we really want to do, is basically provide open source software to the public free of charge. We don't want, no one's going to get rich at the ASF by doing the stuff they do with the ASF. We want it to be a true public charity out there. Now, the ASF exists to provide that legal foundation for it. So I won't go into a lot more detail about that. Okay, it provides that infrastructure required to host and serve the projects out there. We have a source code repository and stuff like that, and those are all the legal tangibles required to create an open source projects out there. Now, every company has this vision statement. If you go to many large companies, it's usually written on the wall someplace on what their grand idea is about their company or organization. And there's this big, mission statement here for the ASF. But you can really distill it down to two key features. First of all, community-created code. And you'll see, as I continue on with the presentation, the idea of community and code are very, very tightly entwined within the ASF. And finally, that the code itself, that we produce should be exceptional. But what's really important is to ensure that you always create a healthy, vibrant community. I'll talk a little bit about why open source and why open source is important. I won't go into a lot of detail, about that because I know other people will be doing it. But the main thing behind open source code is that you do have access to the code. And depending on the license associated with it, that means other people can use it, freely and create commercial properties, commercial offerings with it as well. It also has a proven track record of creating better code, more secure code, and things like that. So it really is a methodology that has really invigorated the software community out there. Okay, some of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD, of open source is that there's no quality control, it slows development. This is obviously all proven wrong, and other people can talk about it later on or during the panel discussions tomorrow. If you have questions, certainly feel free to bring them up during that time. But the thing is that open source is not this new, tricky, not sure about technology. It's definitely very, very important. Okay, why do people develop open source? Why do people do this? Why do people spend their time developing software that they're giving away for free? Okay, well, first of all, it comes back to also, Brian's point about passion. Developers are, by our nature, artists. Our art is in the code. Okay, if you talk to developers, programmers, they'll talk about the beautiful hack, the elegant solution. Okay, these are points that correspond to programming and coding being a visceral, emotional action by the programmer. Okay, so open source provides this opportunity, this environment for developers to display their wares, to create their art and expose it to other people, and allow other people to contribute back their art and grow much larger. So it has a real impact on the actual development of IT, because you're getting all this unified energy by this wide mass of people to create a really comprehensive software package out there. And of course, people have the personal self-satisfaction. Hey, I wrote that, or there's a piece of code inside that software project that's running that website that I know I worked on. If it hadn't been for something I did, it wouldn't have worked the same way, or they would have hit this bug or something like that. Also, what's important is that sense of membership in a community, that you are really someone who's working with other people for a common drive, not just something you're working on by yourself, as a hobby. It's a very community-based oriented. And finally, developers and engineers love a chance to tinker. Stuff is never done. If you give an engineer a job, it's never done, because there's always one more thing to do, one more additional feature to add. And the vibrancy, the agility of open source allows you to tap that potential, because you're constantly releasing new software, you're constantly doing new development. Okay, the Apache way, which is, I guess, the main reason why I'm talking to you today, is basically a common set of conditions and guidelines that we found out within the ASF, how to create projects, how to create code bases, how to build communities out there. There are a lot of open source projects out there. Not everyone uses the exact same methodology that the ASF uses. The development scheme for the Linux kernel, for example, has some differences between the ASF. But basically, these are the things that tie us all together within the ASF as a community. These are things that have been known to work. So why focus on the ASF? Why is the ASF special? Well, on the right-hand side, you'll see that a few months ago, Oracle, as part of their Sun Microsystems acquisition, had inherited the OpenOffice code base, which is basically an open source version of the Microsoft Office. If you also have been familiar with Apache and Oracle, we have had what I would guess would be a combative relationship, basically because of issues revolving around Java, the treatment of Java TCKs and stuff like that. So I guess it would be fair to say that Oracle and the ASF are not friends, or not bosom buddies. So why would someone who really does not like the ASF all that much give such a valuable resource, OpenOffice, to the ASF? It's because they knew they wanted it to succeed. Despite everything else, OpenOffice is an incredibly useful and vibrant open source project. They wanted to give it to somebody. They wanted to donate it to an open source entity, which would give open source the best chance of continued survival. And in their opinion, that was the ASF. Another thing is that some of you may know a gentleman by the name of Simon Phipps, who's also on the OSI board with myself and Tony. And he has this basic rule, this guideline set on how open a community process is. It's called this open by rule scenario. And he goes through all these different factors and things like that and determines, okay, this open source foundation is incredibly open or incredibly non-open. And as you see, the Apache Software Foundation is the only entity, even above Eclipse and GNOME and others, that, in his opinion at least, ranked a perfect 10 out of 10. So the reason why we're focusing on the ASF right now is that it works, obviously. Jeez. Unlike this. So, and many of you are familiar with some of the ASF success stories. I won't belabor those. The Apache web server, the most popular web server out there. Just about every web server derivative is based on HTTPD. Tomcat, J2, server container, again, extremely popular, had been the reference implementation for a long period of time. Apache Geronimo, Maven, these are all projects which have made significant impacts in the IT space. And chances are very good that no matter what software project you're using, there's some Apache code in there somewhere. That's just the nature of the beast. That's just the way it is. So some of the basic memes, some of the basic ideas behind the Apache way, and I'll go into detail on all of these, so we'll just talk about them as we hit them. First of all is the idea of meritocracy, governed by merit. I noticed a lot of Latin in the places around here, so it was really nice having a Latin phrased slide right here. But the idea is basically, the more you do, the more you're allowed to do, the more you're expected to do. You gain merit by doing certain things. The more you code, the more you're enabled to direct the direction of that code. What's also important is the concept of merit, or the worth of an individual, never expires. This is because, again, with the understanding that people are volunteers doing this, your life situation may change. And for 6 months, you may not have the ability to do any kind of coding. Well, it would be very, very unfair if after those 6 months, you had to work your way back up the ladder. So merit never expires. So once you've hit this level, you're always there. The other thing is that, let me flip a little bit longer, okay? Closely related to the idea of merit is the idea that we're all peers. So even though there is this level of merit, at the very top, it's an equal footing. You can't get, a stage where one person is above everyone else. So developers represent themselves. Okay, even though I work for Red Hat, for example, I do not represent Red Hat. The stuff I code isn't on behalf of Red Hat. The merit I earned isn't based on whether Red Hat itself is a great company or not. It's based on what I do individually, okay? So that provides the incentive to me to continue on. There is that mutual trust and respect, which is very, very important inside of communities out there. Also, as related to merit, all votes are the exact same equal. No benevolent dictator for life. That's what BDFL is. And that means there's no, as compared to the Linux development cycle, where Linus has a final say on what goes in or out of the Linux kernel, that's not the way it is with the ASF. Even though I'm president and I've been there for a long time, my vote is worth no more than any one of my peers. So I can't overrule people simply because I've been around here longer. Okay? Okay, why is that important to us? Why is that important to the way we develop code? Well, first of all, the success of a project can only come about by the success of a community. The community needs to exist. The community needs to maintain itself. Yeah, I've been with the ASF for a long period of time. That's very unusual. I've been lucky enough and fortunate enough to be able to continue on with that. But that's not always going to continue. If your community, if your code base is so dependent on a single person, then chances are very good that at some time or another, that single person will go away. Their interests will lie someplace else. You certainly don't want the code base in the community to die or be so dependent on a single person. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why we want to, instill this community. It's sort of like the idea of speciation inside of biology. Okay, as the environment changes, there's enough of variety in the environment that a new species will always come on board. That you'll never get a stagnation. That's very important in this way as well. Okay, a healthy environment ensures you have that warm and inviting feel, such that new developers feel empowered to join in. There's not, they don't walk up into a project and see it's been there for a long period of time and think, there's no way I can contribute anything to that, or there's no way that I could ever get up to the scale of these guys. You want to definitely avoid that. So keeping that barrier to entry low and making sure that everyone is peers is very, very important as well. Poisonous people, which are people who are very, very combative on mailing lists, will demean or deride people. Even if they are a super fantastic programmer, if they are just amazing, but they turn off people, they poison the community, we prefer to just say, that's okay, we don't need your services. Even though we might temporarily take a hit and not get that much code developed in a short period of time, that's okay because we're talking long term. We want the community to survive, even at the expense of possible minor hits later on. Okay, another key factor in this is the idea of consensus building. Okay, stuff doesn't get changed until the entire community agrees that it should be changed. I can't force something through just through myself. I've got to make sure that I have at least 2 other people inside the community who feel the exact same way, that this feature should be added to something like that. So if you follow any of the Apache mailing lists, you'll say this kind of voting system where if somebody says a +1, it means yes, I want to do that. For those of you who are on Google+, yes, that's where Google got the +1 instead of the like button from somebody else. Okay, so as I mentioned before, voting is basically the main way of engaging the community and ensuring there is that consensus within the community, that the community as an entity agrees that this is the direction we should go, rather than splintered, factored off groups and stuff like that. What's really nice is that it's been incredibly rare that Apache projects have had forks where they haven't been able to build that consensus and stuff like that. I have a couple slides about how we do releases and things like that, which I'm really not going to get into now for the sake of time. But they themselves are also based on the idea of ensuring there's competent review over the code, as well as people who are actively engaged and working together. Okay, so this is sort of like a bit of a rehash, but collaborative development is all about what the ASF is. Okay, code is developed by the community, so you need to be able to maintain that, ensure that. Voting ensures that, and development must be done online. You can't do things personally. You can't have small cabals of people try to develop the code and stuff like that. So that's why we use and are very, very insistent on the use of mailing lists. This is really, really great because this ensures that for example, if there are a lot of developers who are based in the US, not that many developers based in Malta, if you're using IRC or something like that, it's synchronous. It's right that period of time. And you're going to feel disenfranchised if all the cool decisions on this technology are being done online by IRC. By having it all done by email, it ensures that no entity feels disenfranchised due to them being in a different area code, time zone, or things like that. It's also available to everyone, so that way you can step away from the project for a long period of time and always come back to it. There are archives and things like that, so there's always a historical record of why the project developed the way it did. Okay, other methods are okay, like using wikis and IRCs, as long as everything comes back to the list. That's not your prime method of doing development. Development always has to be done in the open, just as the code itself is always done in the open. Okay, responsible oversight, especially nowadays with the ideas of patents and intellectual property, is very, very important. Having a large community also ensures that there is responsible oversight because you have plenty of people looking at the code, tracking the IP associated with the code as well. Okay, some of these things are not new or familiar if you're in the scientific or academic community. There's a peer-based review process. So really, in a lot of ways, open source and the open source methodology is not very, very different. We're just leveraging it in what had been historically an avenue where it wasn't being used, which is basically software development. Okay. So some of the gotchas as far as, you know, creating communities and stuff like that is that trust and merit are earned, which implies some time associated with that. So, you know, if the idea is to create a community very, very quickly, you might have to maybe lower those bars to entries even more if possible, okay? The available pool of people might be small, you know, but that's only if you are very, very narrow in your view of what you think this should be. For example, if Marsec and Marsalt were just about, I'm looking at doing this very, very small thing on super yachts, then the available, you know, the pool of developers is very, very small. But by expanding it to the entire maritime industry and all the little bits and pieces that interfaces, that widely increases the pool of people who could be possibly developing and contributing back code and stuff like that. Okay, you have to encourage people to do that, okay? So always trust your developers and your users. You need to have that tight feedback. And a lot of times, your users are your developers. I mean, the reason why I got involved with Apache is because I used the web server. I needed to maintain it was going. Communication is key. Open, vibrant, non-disenfranchising communication is very, very important. Again, that's why we prefer email, okay? Success is not measured by market share, but rather by adoption. And those two things are very, very different. Adoption is much more of people who are willing to take it and do something with it, not feeling forced to do it because there's no other solution available. And finally, the ASF itself serves as a safe, neutral place for people to you know, contribute the code to and for commercial collaboration. If you look at some of the successful open source projects within the ASF, you'll see companies like IBM, Microsoft, RedHat, all working together in the very, very same place. In the very same way, Marsec is that very safe, neutral area for this kind of community to develop. It isn't Marsec controlling things or stuff like that. It provides a central, sort of like, you know, neutral country, neutral land for the development, which is very, very important. And finally, make it easier for developers to join, give them a reason to. Tap into that passion which all developers are, you know, are thriving to use and get out. And finally, that's it. I'd like to dedicate this to my father who passed away a month ago. He instilled in me a love of boating and the water, and so I just think it was appropriate, you know, considering where I am. Thank you very much.
Wow, that's cool. We actually thank you so much, Jim, for sharing this with us. And we won't even start asking the 100 questions now because there will be no lunch. But I must say you brought us into harbor in a very good way here, because what have we learned, guys? Think about it. The European Commission thinks that we can make a big spike, maybe not red, it should be a blue spike, since there's water involved, from Malta around Marsa. You can, if you want to develop, even in your student time on student projects, modules and dedicated to Marsa that can go into new super yachts that will come to your harbor in the next few years. You can create companies based on this. We will learn after lunch from a number of distinguished speakers how to actually make business out of open source and how to go about it. And we can see an enormous possibility for people in Malta and globally to reform an industry that is very fragmented and very complicated to attack. We thank you so much, all keynote speakers. You brought us to lunch on time, and let's keep it that way.